Good afternoon and welcome to Highland Waves, coming to you from Marshbrook Studios located on the bank of the world-renowned Margaree River in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada. At Highland Waves, we feature stories about the people, the places, and those who come to visit us here in Inverness County. This afternoon, I'm pleased to have with me in studio Deirdre Green, the Atlantic Salmon Federation's Executive Director of Regional Programs. Welcome to Highland Waves, Deirdre.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a new position for you.
It is, just October 6th.
Wow. So I'm going to start by asking you to explain to our listeners what the ASF is, what it does, and how it's funded.
Okay, so the Atlantic Salmon Federation has been in existence for over 75 years, and we work to conserve and restore wild Atlantic salmon across the North American range. And so we are a nonprofit, an international nonprofit. That is our key focus. There's over 40 staff members in the United States and Canada, and we are funded. We have a mix of private funding and federal and provincial funding.
There is a U.S. ASF as well as a Canadian ASF.
Correct.
Except for the countries, is there any major differences in what they do?
Well, in the United States, the advocacy would center around the populations in that area, in that region, and the main Headwaters program has been one of the flagship programs, which has focused on connectivity and restoring fish passage. And so we see a lot of success there. And of course, there are a lot of different regulations and hurdles that they have to navigate that we would in Canada.
Okay. What background and education helped you achieve this role?
Interestingly, I came from a property and casualty insurance and risk management background. I did not have any formal education. However, when I started to fly fish in 2015, I connected with a lot of individuals that were passionate about salmon on the river, and some of our groups that are volunteers, like the St. Mary's River Association, the Margaree Salmon Association. All of those types of groups are people that you cross paths with on the river, and that's what got me interested in a career of conservation and advocacy.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. From your description of what you do, you likely do a lot of traveling.
I do.
Okay. And where is your home base?
I live in Sherbrooke on the St. Mary's River.
Really?
I do, yeah.
Why base yourself there? I guess in today's world you can pretty much work from anywhere.
You can, and so it ended up being a nice way to commute 2 hours to Cape Breton if it's not a traffic jam, construction delays that pushes you to 3.5 hours like today. But no, it's a nice trek to Cape Breton, and then equally to our Halifax office. When I was in the Nova Scotia program director role, that was really convenient.
Were you born there?
I was born in Halifax, but I lived on the Eastern Shore in Sheet Harbour until I was 6. And then I moved to the Annapolis Valley.
Oh, so you've been all over the place.
I have.
Is part of your job description require you to be a salmon angler?
It does not. But it's interesting that salmon angling kind of awakened in me a passion I didn't know I had. And I think it's really important to get folks into that. Just having that connection with a wild fish, whether it's trout or salmon, and having our youth connect to it can change careers and the whole trajectory of your life, which is what I've seen.
Yeah, because it puts you in the space, right?
It does.
As you know, so you know what everybody else is doing at the same time.
Yeah.
Here in Nova Scotia, there are several volunteer organizations devoted to Atlantic salmon conservation. Chief amongst them is the Nova Scotia Salmon Association, which has a number of affiliates, as you know, the Margaree Salmon Association and the Shettycamp Association here in Inverness County. How does ASF partnership work with all of those groups in the province, for example, of Nova Scotia?
Sure. So I often talk about this in the landscape of the salmon ecosystem or the Federation family. So we have the Atlantic Salmon Federation, independent, of course, of all of these other nonprofit organizations. But as an environmental NGO groups, we all are connected because we have that shared focus of Atlantic salmon conservation. And so how it works is every province has a regional council, and that is here the Nova Scotia Salmon Association. The regional council president in Nova Scotia would be Corey Mosier, is also a board member of ASF. And then within the province, and they would have a more regional focus, provincial focus of any issues facing salmon here in the province. And then for each individual watershed, or over the years, we've had different legacy or historic salmon rivers, and little groups have formed of volunteers, as you know. And so the Margaree being one, Cheticamp River Salmon Association being another, but there's about 25 of those throughout Nova Scotia. And so those affiliate or partner groups would have a more even laser focused lens on that specific watershed that they're located upon.
Okay.
And so they would often lean on ASF for support when it comes to communications or advocacy, because we do have the staffing capacity and resources that perhaps some of the smaller volunteer organizations do not have. And then, for instance, the Nova Scotia Salmon Association having a lot of staff and resources, and their flagship program, the Adopt a Stream, for in-stream restoration work, they are then there to help support and mentor all of these groups and bring them along in their individual watershed plans.
Okay. There is another organization here in Nova Scotia, and the acronym is UINR, which is the Unimaki Institute of Natural Resources for our listeners. Is ASF's role with the UINR any different than it is with other groups?
I don't see it as being different in the sense that we are all focused again on salmon, but we have Indigenous partnerships that form again within that ecosystem. So our Indigenous partners, our academic partners, our federal and provincial government partners, we all connect and we all can work together. And so the more we partner, then the stronger we are. And so oftentimes some of those key programs or projects that are worked on, or advocacy issues that are happening in the province, require all of us teaming up together and getting behind them. So those are the types of things that we would work with any number of partners on, regardless of if it was a ENGO, an academic, an Indigenous organization.
Okay. Relatively new ASF developments in conservation are the wild salmon watersheds and headwaters initiatives. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you can tell our listeners about them.
Sure. So first of all, I can talk about headwaters. So as I mentioned earlier, headwaters came from the Maine Headwaters program, and 2 years ago we moved that into Canada because we wanted to have freshwater focus as well here in Canada for our groups and to support the watersheds locally. And so it focuses on fish passage, like connectivity issues, and also creation of cold water refuge. So we see great success in Maine with the dam removals and remediation efforts, opening up kilometers of habitat. And so that's the same focus here, but it's much smaller scale as of right now. So what we've done in each province is we started off with small funding amount, and we directly partnered with local affiliate groups so that we could help them with their in-stream restoration work and fish passage and connectivity projects. And in Nova Scotia, it only makes sense to partner with the NSSA because they're already doing that work. Not every province has a regional council like the NSSA. So I connected with Nick and Amy from the Nova Scotia Salmon Association, and we looked at which projects would make the most sense for us to support, both financially and with technical and in-stream efforts. So last year we partnered with 2 groups, and this past year we partnered with 3. And so our goal is every year to expand that and grow further. And we put out a request to NSSA, a little similar to their Adopt a Stream call, where we asked them for their recommendations on who we could work with. And I would expect that call for proposals will only increase as funding to this program increases. And then for wild salmon watersheds, that's led by my colleague Chris Hunter, and he has a science coordinator working with him, Jordan Condon. And so wild salmon watersheds is our flagship freshwater program. It was conceived over 3 years ago, and we selected pilot watershed candidates 3 years ago to partner with us. And so we have the Cheticamp River Salmon Association and the Margaree Salmon Association, the Nipisiguit, and we have the Terra Nova River through Fayback in Newfoundland. So Nipisiguit's New Brunswick. So there's 4 watersheds right now that we've been partnered with. And the strategy on the wild salmon watersheds is to look at where Atlantic salmon populations are thriving at present in relation to others. So we didn't want to look at only compromised populations and rivers that are really struggling, but where are they doing quite well, relatively speaking, and let's help ensure that they stay in that state in the face of climate change and all the other hosts of challenges that are facing salmon. And so we're looking at ensuring that in the next 7 generations or 100 years that these systems stay and if not improve. And so that's the focus. And we also were keen on looking for groups that are already doing really great work and that have things under control as far as their restoration efforts and advocacy. And we have those really strong groups here in Nova Scotia. And so we're happy to just inject additional resources to help them continue doing the great work they're already doing.
Wonderful. The emphasis probably has increased with respect to climate change in the last while, I would assume.
It has.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because this river, for example, the Margaree Salmon River, or the Margaree River, is seeing this year probably one of the worst years ever for warm water and low water. So
that's right. And I sit on that warm water protocol committee with, of course, the regulator is DFO, but we have a whole host of entities and organizations that sit there. And it's one of the longest closures. And like you say, it's the first time that we've seen the entire system closed under that protocol.
Since the emphasis of the wild salmon watersheds is on rivers that have reasonably healthy populations of Atlantic salmon, how do you determine they have healthy populations?
Well, that can be a challenge because, as we all know, anyone in the salmon world knows, assessment can be a challenge, population assessment, and over the years, the federal assessments have declined. So what we look at is, we have some anecdotal information, but also we look at DFO's CSAS reports and the IC's reports to see where are salmon thriving and what are the higher populations. We are looking to grow the program and expand into more northern regions, and we have conversations happening right now with the Regional Council in Quebec and what rivers and areas might be suited to wild salmon watersheds moving forward. So the 4 that we began with is only just the beginning. We hope to grow this substantially.
What about other rivers that are not included in the wild salmon watersheds and headwaters program that do have salmon runs? What's happening with those rivers?
So every province, like I mentioned, in Eastern North America has a regional council and a number of affiliates. And every, in ASF's team, we have a provincial program director in each of these areas to help support all the things happening that could impact Atlantic salmon. And so if I can speak for Nova Scotia in my 3 years as program director here, the St. Mary's River Association, the LaHave River Salmon Association, Inverness South Anglers, a lot of different partners of ours may or may not be directly partnering under headwaters or wild salmon watersheds, but we still actively help them and work with them because we know there are salmon in those systems. And that could range as it could be financial support, it could be hands-on support, it could be advocacy because there's an expansion proposed for an open net pen, aquaculture farm in their area, or an open pit gold mine or something of that nature, or land protection advocacy that we want to get behind because we want to see the riparian landscape protected. So there's a whole host of ways that we work with groups. They don't have to be formally partnered with one of our 2 freshwater programs.
Okay. Every community loves its watershed. What discussions, if any, do you have with those community organizations and the community at large that have not been included in the Wild Salmon Watersheds program? Do you have any communications with the people? Like, it would be difficult if there's not an organized group on that particular river.
Yes, so yes, we'd like to see an ENGO, like a small volunteer organization to partner with. It can be challenging to start from scratch, but of course we've seen that happen where there is very good health of the surrounding ecosystem. There's other ENGOs that are not specific salmon associations that we have partnered with over the years as well. So CPAWS and Nature Trust are a few that come to mind in Nova Scotia here. ACAP, Cape Breton, yeah.
I think their inclusion in programs is an important aspect of public relations because in the past, and I think still, there are some negative attitudes on the part of some citizens that the ASF is an elitist organization, only interested in keeping the salmon population up for their own purposes. Is there still a residue of that attitude around?
I think I've heard that a few times in my tenure for the last 3.5 years, and a little bit maybe through volunteer work prior to. But I feel like we're drawing away from that, because when I think about our staffing, not everyone is an angler. Everyone is a conservationist, but we have birders, we have folks that just enjoy the outdoors, from hiking, paddling, things like that. The same as our membership. And I do know that in partnering with different other ENGO groups, that comes up as a point of conversation, because they're interested in our perspective on catch and release angling. And so we often have a discussion about that. And I think that's breaking down those barriers and that conversation or that assumption perhaps that we're just concerned about it for the selfish pursuit of angling. Because I know for myself and for many of us at ASF, that old school view that we were an angling organization first has definitely, long been gone.
I certainly don't get confronted with those questions as much now when I'm out and about as I did, say, 5-10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's always been a diversity of discussion on enhancement, particularly with respect to hatcheries. What's ASF's position currently on hatcheries?
On hatcheries. So there's a whole host of different operations for hatcheries. So like in Colebrook, we have the live gene banking that's happening, the Colebrook Biodiversity Facility. And so they're working with populations that are listed under the Species at Risk Act in our Bay of Fundy rivers, and taking a few fish and breeding them, and then they are selectively breeding them based on genetics. We don't have an issue with that. Now, do we think that that's actually enhancing? Likely not, but it's preserving some genetics, and so that's important. When we look at stocking, there's like the smolt to adult supplementation. There is stocking, a whole host of different ways that folks are stocking today. And so it just depends. It's a river by river kind of view. It's not just one policy that we would say we're opposed to stocking altogether or we're pro stocking. It would have to be considered on a case by case basis to see what the scientific justification and rationale is and how it's impacting the wild Atlantic salmon stocks in that system.
Well, certainly DFO has divested itself pretty much of hatcheries in the last number of years.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some, as you indicate, when we speak of hatcheries now, it's far more complicated than just hatcheries. There's many different methodologies that are being used in hatcheries today than they were 15, 20 years ago.
There are. And my colleague, David Roth in New Brunswick, he is the New Brunswick program director with ASF. He just recently was an author on a paper, and I can send it to you after the fact to link to this, but it talks about stocking, and it would be something that would be, if folks are interested in that, they would really find his research of interest.
Good.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, there are changes being made in the hatchery programs, if I can use that term. And last year I attended a symposium in Moncton, New Brunswick, and I think you were also at that symposium. And there was a couple of scientists, former DFO scientists, now retired, who felt strongly that as we go forward with all of the challenges that salmon have, there is the possibility that we'll have to revert more to enhancement, maybe through hatcheries at different levels, to keep the salmon where they are.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say that our position necessarily agrees with that, because we're focused on the wild Atlantic salmon and not, like we talked about just earlier, not stocking for the sake of just having a population in the river that can be angled for. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think I would leave it at that.
But they live in the same river. If they put hatchery fish in and they wild fish in, you still have that.
That's right.
Situation. Speaking of retention, that's something else that I get fewer questions on now, is will we ever go back to a retention fishery? I'll ask you that question.
Well, I think it's a nice optimistic view to have. We would have to have the science to support that. And that's a question, not just retention, but also reopening salmon angling in rivers where it's been closed. So it's been shut down because we've not met the conservation requirement according to assessments over the years. And of course, when it's closed to salmon angling, maybe it's open to trout fishing or something of that nature still, or closed altogether, you have to have a proper assessment that shows that it's meeting that conservation requirement before it could be reopened again. And then there will also be discussions with the Indigenous partners respecting retention from a First Nation side of things, as that comes first before, following conservation, that comes first before any other recreational pursuit. And so I think that if we were ever to get back to that point where the salmon runs are healthy enough and we can substantiate that through science, then that's a great problem to have, to start having those conversations, exactly. Right?
What is the status of the Restore, Maintain and Thrive initiative put forward by the federal government to help secure the future of Atlantic salmon? I think ASF has committed something like $25 million to that project. Is that still underway? I don't hear much about it in the recent past.
Are you thinking about the Wild Atlantic Salmon Conservation Strategy?
That may be part of it.
Yeah. Well, for that point, we have advocated for funding to be matching that, like commensurate to the Pacific Salmon Fund, or strategy, I'm sorry. And we were disappointed to see that that wasn't the case when it was recently announced. But we are not stopping in our advocacy for that. We think that Wild Atlantic salmon deserve the same level of support from the federal government. And actually, some of our team are going to Ottawa this week to continue those discussions.
I think it was in Moncton. There was a panel discussion, and there were two senior bureaucrats from DFO at that particular meeting. And I asked that particular question with respect to the funding that the West Coast salmon get as opposed to Atlantic salmon, and there was dead silence when the response was expected. They danced around it a bit, but they really didn't give me an answer on that one.
No, and it's quite a different landscape there, obviously, yeah. And they don't like to be pinned down for a response.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, I guess.
No, I don't disagree with you. I think we've done that ourselves.
Do you feel the state of Atlantic salmon, which is an iconic species, gets a fair share of media attention?
I mean, I do see it here in Nova Scotia more and more. Like, I'm connected with quite a few reporters, and they'll often message me for comments on things because they're following along with our restoration efforts or our advocacy work. I think we can raise more probably at a national level, but I'm pleased with what I'm seeing from the media locally.
Okay. Of course, there's a film now called Rock Plastic Salmon out there for people to have a look at. And I viewed it a little while ago, and I was quite pleased with what I saw there.
Mm-hmm. So that's part of our communications team. Yeah. In their focus with our aquaculture campaign is to really educate folks on the damage that industry is doing and the pollution that comes with it, and why it's not just the fact that there's introgression and the impact on wild fish, but there's on wild Atlantic salmon, but there's impacts on all of the entire environment based on how they're operating today. And so we see a very different approach in BC on the West Coast and how the government is treating aquaculture to how they're treating it here. And we're trying to highlight that as well for folks to see. Yeah,
there's certainly, like, just taking an example, the south coast of Newfoundland, it's been decimated by open net pens. And ASF has done a pretty good job of getting the information out there on what's happening. Mm-hmm. But outside of Newfoundland, you don't see that addressed Atlantic Canada wide. It seems to be more focused on Newfoundland, some in Nova Scotia. But
we just had John Carr attend and give expert testimony at the Liverpool Bay hearing in Bridgewater there this past week. Fortunately, not too many expansion proposals in Nova Scotia as of right now. Okay. But that campaign, you know, if ever we get queries from folks in any other region, the aquaculture and campaign staff and experts on our comms team will help out with that as well. So it's not exclusive to Newfoundland by any means.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back to your angling. You're a busy woman.
Yeah.
Do you get a chance to cast the line occasionally?
I do. This season, far less because of the drought conditions, unfortunately. But I was out. So as I have a 3.5-year-old, almost 4-year-old, and I took him out in a carrier when he was an infant. And then all the way up until this year, he and I went trout fishing a fair bit in the spring when we had good water.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so we had a good time. And I might try to get him up here before the season closes, just because it's not great that it's lower water, but from a safety perspective and having a toddler with you, it makes me a little bit more comfortable actually than
Yes,
the typical
would.
fall flows. So yeah, I'd like to get him up here for that. But he's had his hands on Atlantic salmon and on trout. But motherhood is an interesting journey, and I do miss my long days on the river where I could get up and be there for first light and leave at last light. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite river to fish? You probably won't tell me anyway, so.
No, I don't mind. I mean, the St. Mary's is where I first started to fly fish, so that is a very special river to me in that way. But the Margaree is where I learned really how to salmon angle, and a lot of dear friends from here that have taught me a lot of things.
Oh, great.
So, yeah.
Is there anything you would like to add before we conclude?
I would just say that coming back to that story for myself, you know, I didn't ever start my professional career thinking that this is where I would end up. And the reason that I'm here today and working in an area that I'm passionate about and that I think will make great change for future generations is because I was exposed to being in nature at a young age, and I was keenly interested in learning how to fly fish because it gave kind of a hiking, camping destination of sorts. And it's not whether or not I put a hand on a fish to release it or to cook a trout for dinner or something. It's just the adventure and the ability to be outside and what you're able to see when you're out. And so the first few times that I fly fished, I was able to see, a whitetail swimming across the river, a family of bears pop, and two cubs pop out. Things that you don't see typically because you're standing in the river, your scent is obscured, your sound is obscured, and everyone who's an outdoors person knows that. But I just think that it's so important for us to introduce new individuals, whether they're young or old, to whether it's nature or whether it's to fly fishing, just so they're able to see what all is involved in these beautiful rivers that are just outside their doorsteps.
Exactly.
And really it can bring forth the next generation of conservationists, which we need, because when we work with these groups, a lot of them are aging out and they need new, fresh energy to help support the good work that they've already been doing. So I think that's just a really, really mindful piece for everyone that's involved in this, to bring someone new out with you, bring your children and your grandchildren out too.
You'll never regret it.
No, you won't. And salmon they will thrive for sure, but I think they need people and they need us to care about them.
Exactly. So you have this new position, which means your past position is empty?
Currently I'm working in dual roles.
Dual roles.
But no, I am working closely with our people and culture manager, HR, Michelle McRae, to fill the Nova Scotia program director role. So you will see a posting shortly on our socials for the Nova Scotia program director position. Okay. And we would encourage anyone who's interested to reach out to Michelle directly.
How do they do that?
Her email address will be there.
Okay.
So it's, and she's also on our website, but mmcrae@asf.ca. And that posting will outline all the duties of the position as it would. And we really are excited for that, to have a new team member joining. And in addition, Charles Cousin, who's our Quebec program director, after a very long tenure in that role, he will be kind of stepping into a more fundraising position. And so his role will also be posted soon for someone who resides in Quebec. Yeah.
Well, Deirdre, thank you very much after a long day getting here for your time and telling our listeners about ASF and what the partners do for Atlantic salmon and the watersheds they live in. And good luck in this position. And thank you to our listeners. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button so you can stay up to date. And remember, subscribing is free. Our thought for today is, If our salmon are not healthy, then our watersheds are not healthy. And if our watersheds are not healthy, then we have truly squandered our heritage and mortgaged our future. I think we all have to help. So long for now, Pat.